Um, I don't know that's letting me record now.
Oh,
Um,
okay. It's not. Okay.
okay, it says pause recording or stop recording. Sorry, everyone. I'll just let you record it and then you can have it. It'll be fun. You can send
Okay.
it to me if you want. All right,
Yeah.
hello everyone. Sorry
Hi.
you caught us doing technicals. We are here with Nate Spear. We were here with him last month. We had such a good talk that I'm so excited for today's talk, which Nate reached out to me to actually talk about this teleology and the soul. And so I'm gonna curious, I'm gonna let Nate kind of start and take us, and then if we have extra time, we're gonna read random quotes from Ensoulment.
Yes.
All right,
Yes. That was
what
a
do you
great introduction. Now, so I remember one of the things that inspired me to have this conversation with you when I first started thinking about it was that I was looking back at this passage that was written by James Hillman, the archetypal psychologist, who I really consider to be kind of one of my intellectual philosophical heroes. Um, and he's writing about kind of our fantasy of personal growth in our culture and how he basically says that the fantasy of personal growth um, often shows no respect for what he calls sameness or consistency in a person, as in what stays the same rather than changing. And he says sameness is a very important part of life, to be consistently the same in certain areas that don't change, don't grow. He says some things stay the same. They're like rocks. There's rocks in the psyche. There are crystals, there's iron ore, there's a metallic level where some things don't change. And he's not really arguing that life is always changing or that life is never changing. He's saying both of these are kind of valid categories of existence to look at, but how it's really important as people who kind of counsel people and consult people as we do as astrologers with clients. It's like to look at when you try to when you approach a counseling profession or something like that, where you say, I'm going to take this person and make them this or that, or push them in this or that direction, what are you really doing? You have to have respect for what doesn't want to change in the person as well. So that's part of the backstory of like this episode and this conversation we're having. But I want to ask you, Andrea, what uh, how do you use the idea of soul in your practice as an astrologer? And how does the idea of telos fit into this, or teleology fit into that? The
Interesting.
idea of soul. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I love about having you on the show is you ask me questions, which it doesn't
Yeah.
happen very often. So this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Well, first I want to talk about the sameness thing. Can
Yeah. Yeah.
I add
Yeah.
topic? So it's really interesting because teleology is the study of things becoming themselves, and you hear that term becoming in there. So actually, according to teleology, we're always becoming. And so the question is, what are we becoming? What were we? What are we growing into? What's the same? What's the different? All that kind of stuff. And I think, the chart infrastructure would be considered the same on our path of becoming. If we have a Sun Mars conjunction, for example, we would say that that stays static in the natal chart. And so we have a genetic tendency towards crankiness or being salty, perhaps. And so but cyclically, that's going to be expressed in along your path of becoming. So, are you always going to be salty every day of your life? No, we are never the same all the time. We are cyclically the same, or similar. Right? Well, there'll be different trends every year on your birthday. The sun hits it comes back to the moment of your sun, and in that way, we're the same every year on our birthday. Although the other planets are not the same, right? So I think, the chart actually can handle that. Like, what is the sameness here? And then what is changing in that path of becoming? I remember one time I had Jupiter go over my sun and it was my birthday. It was a Sun Jupiter birthday. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had this party and like all these people showed up and I was like, it's not me, it's the transit. Like, don't even thank me. It's not even me. I'm not even getting excited about this. Because I just knew it was a fleeting, it was it was the flow. It wasn't like me per se, right? But but my son's in the fifth house, and I was playing the piano at this party, and I was like, the sameness there is that I constantly am being a creative artist type. That's sun in five, but the magnitude of the energy around that was super huge in this moment in becoming. So I think astrology can handle Hillman, and we can say both. We can study the sameness, and we can also acknowledge the differences along that path of becoming.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah,
you want to
I
speak to that, or should I go to the soul question?
Oh, no, I agree with you. And yeah, it's that, and I think it circles back to kind of something we had another conversation about a month ago, and you were kind of addressing the idea of how we are a certain way when we're this age, and we're a certain way when we're like 10 years or 20 years older than that, and we're like all these different stages of becoming, there's that word again, and how all of those are part of our essential core and who we are. And we get to see all those different iterations of becoming. So yes, yes to that. And yeah, I'd love to hear you address the soul question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a question of like, what is a soul? Like in the book Ensoulment, which, this is a translated word. It's really like on the path of the soul entering the body, or I can't remember what the title is in Greek, but I think the whole essay is kind of addresses the question of what is the soul. And we always think in some ways of the soul as this thing inside the vessel, like here I am, and the soul is in there, and when I read Ensoulment, it's like really what you see is the soul is woven in and among us. It's like every cell of our body is a soul. And in fact, we concretize into a body because a soul is coming down to earth, or the essential nature is literally concretizing. And so they would say that the soul sprouts in the ether, and that that for some life purpose actually, and that's the telos, is kind of like what is your purpose, and what are you here to do. And so I would say that the soul kind of is interwoven and permeates a whole person. It would be the dynamic vector like fluctuating spiritual thing that kind of extrudes through the chakras. I mean, I feel like the sunlight hits our eyes, goes down our spine, and it activates our soul. When we're sleeping, we're basically dead in some ways. I mean, we're like the sunlight comes in, and then all of a sudden our soul senses machine is awake. And so I think it has a lot to do with the sensory apparatus, and what we're how we're built to sense the world around us is kind of the quality of our soul. What can I ask you the same question? What do you think the soul is?
Yeah. Well, I have my favorite takes on it. I think at a bare bones level, I just know that the word soul is something that speaks to me and resonates with me. I just feel it as true. And that the idea of you first and foremost, it's like we could say you are an astrologer, you are a scholar, you are many whats, you are many nouns that we could think of. But first, you're a soul. And I like that idea. I resonate to that idea. First, you're a soul, which speaks to your who-ness. There's this like undoubtable or indisputable quality of you as a who, as a person, that contains many different nouns, many different kind of functions you do in the world, but is not dependent on those functions. That you have a person. I think soul is connected to the personness that you are, which is just to me, that's like the supreme thing is like your personhood is what is core. And I've been influenced back to Hillman again by Hillman's definition. He doesn't really define soul so much as say that it's he says that it's a perspective rather than a substance, a viewpoint towards a thing rather than a thing itself. And yet those are actually the exact words he says. So it's kind of like when you're talking about soul, it's sort of a perspective that you're taking it's like, oh, let's look at this in a soulful way. And I do think astrology, that's part of what astrology is. It's looking at someone in a soulful way. in especially in the context now of a culture that's been very demythologized, or we could argue unensouled in a certain way, at least by our explicit, at least by, the dominant culture's explicit convictions and ideas. Um, so there's that, and part of that soulful viewpoint, the perspective, it involves going deeper, looking deeper and deeper, and what Hillman talks about as turning events into experiences instead of looking at things just as sort of isolated, mechanical, disconnected events that have no meaning. Like soul has inherently a sort of meaning-making function to it.
Mhm.
So that's what I got for you on that.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's I guess soul. It makes me think of the word soul, SOL, like
Mm,
soleil, like that means sun, right? Like, and so there's so much of the soul that comes from the sunlight activating the soul. Like, we could say that, people always are looking like, is the sun your soul? Is the moon your soul? It's like they're all it's almost like your soul, the sunlight extrudes through the interface of the chart, which is cyclical and fluctuating and has different meanings and tendencies. So if you have a Venus conjunct Jupiter, your soul, when extruding through that keyhole, plays music, perhaps. And if you have then a Moon Saturn conjunction in Capricorn, when your soul extrudes through that, you might be building Lincoln Logs. And and so I think it's like these cyclical and fluctuating resonance extrusion patterns that create like the wholeness of a human. And look at our telos and what is our life path and purpose? It's like this aggregate mixture of all the extrusions.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that image of like when you're keyed into this, you might be doing the playing music. When you're doing that, you might keyed into that part, you might be chopping wood. Yeah, that's gorgeous. And yeah, I feel that as true. I also I have your book here, the Astrological Remediation book, which I really do think this is one of the I was having like one of my late night sort of wakings and like insomniac moments a few weeks ago. And I was looking through this book and just and thinking this really needs to be one of the top 10 books on in astrologers' libraries. So I really do think that about your book. And you have this paragraph here in the introduction that says, we could propose that each person has a vibrational pattern which is locked within their DNA, cells, soul, and heart. This vibrational pattern is indicated by the astrological chart for the moment of birth. One function of astrology about which we know very little is exactly how these astral influences combine within and affect us. So I just wanted to quote you there because you say it so succinctly as this vibrational pattern that's within the DNA, cells, soul, and heart. And there it is. Yeah.
It's really interesting as I've gotten older, like I really think of astrology as like as we think of genetics, right? Like, like you're genetically predisposed towards XYZ issue is usually a pathology. But if there's something in your chart, we can say you're genetically predisposed to play music or, to be a teacher or whatever. And because they would call the chart Genesis. And it literally, and to tell a person, you have a violent aspect or you have a musical aspect is saying you are predisposed towards this tendency, and so
Right.
yeah, I think it is akin to DNA to say that the chart is, but okay, do you think that the soul is often imagined as a static thing?
Yeah. I think it often is, which is funny because, well, it goes back to a way we could potentially misunderstand the quote that I started this with, which was about the unchanging. Um, but it is funny because when we think about people who have talked about the soul, like Heraclitus talking about how the soul is so deep, we could never fully know it, for so deep is the soul's logos, right? I think it was Heraclitus who said that. But I think you're right. I think it is often talked about as a static thing, but it's not. It's not so simple at all.
Well, It makes me think of, okay, dating. Okay, so let's say
Yeah.
somebody like goes on a date and they're like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
just loved her soul. It was, this and that," and they think that you can like rock someone's soul in one date. And like the astrologer me is like laughing because I'm like, we take one turn of the sun. Okay, we watch that soul for one sun hand of it. This is a wise elder thing to say is like date for 1 year before you see all parts of the soul expressed. I mean,
Mhm.
so whereas people think you can just get someone's soul in a 5-minute window, that's not the astrological definition of a soul.
Right. I hear a lot of right. I hear a lot of Neptune in that state of the thinking like, oh, I saw their soul in 5 minutes, kind of thing. There's this sort of not to knock Neptune, right? Neptune is wonderful in a lot of ways, but it can also give us that sort of Delulu quality sometimes.
Well, the delusion there is that the soul is static
Yeah.
and that it doesn't
Right,
fluctuate like in these
right.
crazy ways.
True, true, true. And yeah, that's funny. Yes. Oh, there was something else I was going to say about that. But no, I think you're so right. And I feel like there is there needs to be a conversation too about multifacetedness. Like how do Talos and the multifacetedness that we are, how do those things work together? Because I think a lot about how um, there is this mythology, there is this sort of myth. I don't know if you were raised with this, but I feel like I was, where there was kind of this idea that like you had to be one thing or that you had to specialize in one thing or, it's like know what you want to do and just, do that thing. And you know, as I have gotten as I've gotten older, there's this sort of tension between, yes, there's a definite sense that there's a calling of the soul. I really do. Um, that is my experience. We are intended toward things. We have to, I am not you. Each of us are specific. Um, and yet there's sort of an interplay between that idea of when you have a calling, the calling keeps calling. And at the same time, it's good to let ourselves be multifaceted and not turn that calling into like this sort of rigid fixed idea when certain other potentialities want to come out of us. It's like you were saying about sort of keying into this transit or that, like this aspect of your cycle or that aspect of your cycle. You might find you expressing different parts of yourself, right?
Mhm.
So the idea of telos and also multifacetedness, how do you think, yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I love your questions. You're such a good teacher. So I think this actually in the mega manifestation lecture we kind of address this with okay, there's something called an apotelos which was what the ancients would call a graph of your telos and all things about the telos that you use to express full on, which is um it's a chart, it's an astrological chart, so it's like and what we do is I'll show in the slide deck, I'll show here's your chart, here's your apotelosmetograph, right? And it's really overwhelming and there's all these lines and people are just like, oh, the chart, it's so overwhelming. But then we explode it out onto wheels. And I got this from architects where they do something called an exploded axon, where they'll put a building on one sheet of paper, there's a whole building, and then every floor they put on one piece of paper, and then they'll explode out the kitchen sink. And auto mechanics do this with like a transmission. You'll see like an exploded diagram. So we started exploding the diagram into aspect wheels. So, like your Taurus sun might be on one wheel, and then your I don't know, your chart, or you have your Sag something would be on another wheel. And the point is when we look at things in this exploded way with one aspect of personality on each wheel, we can see the soul and its aggregate pieces, its multifacetedness. We can study each facet of the personality. You can take, you can look at it, use it different ways. Like once we get the explosion, then let's say we have a, Taurus sun. Well, we can watch it, we can say, we can watch it for the next 6 months. Oh, Mars in Taurus goes over it, or Jupiter transit, or or you can say, you can study it for the next 5 years, or you can say the point is we can start working with each facet of the personality to kind of enhance or mega manifest that piece of the puzzle. And so I think that's how I technically do it. I mean, maybe you were asking more rhetorically, but I really technically look at each piece because often we think our life purpose is one thing, like I'm a carpenter. That's my life purpose. Well, not
Right.
according to astrology. It's like you're the carpenter who also is a chef, who also is, it's like some carpenters sing, some are football fans. Like there's every carpenter is different, and so the telos is actually several pieces. They call it, sorry to be long-winded, but they would call it the song of life. The chart is the song of
Yeah.
life. And a song has about four chords usually in it. It's like a chord progression. And so when you look at the chart, it's like this is a chord, this is a chord, this is a chord. So it's like the chord progression of the song of life is like, so each chart is like a different song, playing different aspects of personality. So that's
Yeah.
my.
Oh, I love that. I agree. And I think that it can cause I think it's there needs to be a more kind of all-encompassing embrace of this idea that we are each of us has a song of life to play. We each have a song of life. Um, uh, that you're intended towards something, you're intended towards certain things, but that doesn't mean that you have to like integrate that all into some fixed idea. Maybe, maybe this is just me because I have a lot of fixed signs in my chart, just fixed placements. But I think for people who, and maybe for those who have a lot of challenging aspects or inconjuncts or things like that, there could be this sense of inner internal it might be at first experienced as conflict sometimes between this or that. One of my favorite cognitive tools that I kind of work with and talk with people about, with clients about, is I call the false dichotomy buster, where like you have some, because sometimes we can sort of create these kinds of artificial dichotomies in our minds between like, oh no, but I shouldn't like let myself pursue this because my life was supposed to be all about that thing, and da 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 da, and it's like, well, that's really we don't need to have that dichotomy. With that doesn't need to be an internal conflict or a problem. It's just you are letting more of yourself mega manifest. You're letting more of yourself, you're letting more colors of your rainbow show and be experienced.
Yeah.
So
I have a
I,
question for you. I'm sorry.
yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
So to what extent do you think that the soul is malleable?
Yeah.
And is it our job as astrologers to be aware of the soul and manipulate it, or not manipulate, but influence it? Or what is in the formation of the soul, like what's malleable and what are we here to do as astrologers?
Hmm. Well, your question somehow makes me think of the lunar nodes. Not sure exactly why that's the first place my mind went to when you just asked it, but I think it's because I'm seeing images both of sculpting something and like building something up, or like the incoming tide and the outgoing tide, or like what, so it's like something is being built and sculpted and something is also being cleared and purged. And I do think there is this kind of, I don't know if maybe there's a malleability. Um, I think there's also it's maybe part of the nature of soul is that it's this constant participatory dialogue. I think a lot about that we are in. I think a lot about how I think with the soul, there's this inherent creative tension that takes place between familiarity and novelty. Like the soul loves what is familiar, what's comfortable, what's the soul actually thrives on attachment and being attached to certain places, things, people, but the soul is also interested in what's new. And so that's part of what makes me think of the lunar nodes in both directions. And that's one of the things that I'm trying more and more as an astrologer to work creatively with people on is in actually an experiential way is on the north and south node and like what are you kind of building up um, in terms of your conscious experience of this life experience you're having, and what are you either kind of clearing out and really letting go and surrendering, giving back to the universe, or what are you realizing like, whoa, this is actually a lot of mastery from the past that I actually have to consciously give out to the world now at the same time that I'm kind of working on building up this other new stuff. Um, so it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think that I do think part of the heart of soul is I think the malleability part is a little bit of a riddle. It makes me also think of water and those what are those experiments of how water is influenced by certain
Yeah,
thoughts
the secret
or
life of water. Yeah.
the secret life of water. I mean, that makes what you're asking sort of makes me think a little bit of that. Like there is this malleable quality, so we're in this constant dialogue with it
Mhm.
between the familiar and the novel and. Um, yeah, and so there's this. So again, we're back to this idea of the changing and the changeless. I don't know if I told you, oh, if I've shared with you before that I've have like a lot of Buddhist background and like specifically in Vajrayana tantric Buddhism. But one of the things that I could never really I've sort of since I'm still very grateful to Buddhism and for the people that I learned from within it and everything. One of the things that I never really could kind of square with it is this idea of that no self, that like the self doesn't exist, basically.
Mhm.
Um, so because yeah, that idea of soul, it's not really there. It's like everything changes, everything is impermanent, within that. So, but yeah, but what do you think?
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I'm kind of an astrological extremist where I really
yeah.
believe that the chart is this, soul senses machine that we live in. Like, our soul is in some ways married to our sensory apparatus. Like, for example, like you're a Taurus, right? And so we would say that you sense the world through your nose and throat. And I'm a Scorpio, well, Libra Scorpio cusp, so I sense the world through the kind of lower watery regions or something like that. But if you and I went to Denny's or some restaurant, you might notice the food on the menu, and I might notice the hot waiter or something. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you're kind of a sensualist, but the point is that the soul is inherently tied to how we're built to sense things, and so I think I love your point of it being a dialogue. I think we can choose. The free will comes in is how we choose to dialogue, as you would call it, with those senses. It's like I can become a more mature version of a Scorpio, or vice versa, you with a Taurus, right? Like, let's say you're overeating as a Taurus, you can kind of become a more mature version, decide that you're going to smell flowers and make perfume or something. But the point is your soul is still kind of fated to live in these certain sensory regions. And
Yeah.
so I do think that the reason, I mean, reading all these books in ancient Greek, it's like I learned ancient occult magic, basically, which is to mega manifest the soul. I mean, one of the reasons we're supposed to be an astrologer is to say, I'm going to express my soul to a level, as like once we know our sensory apparatus and our fluctuating states of being, now we can start planning for those and really manifesting everything, where it becomes down to mega manifestation theory of we're gonna take our soul. Like there's this word in Greek, melatao, which means to train the body for that which it was made. So if you're made to be a musician, you train as a musician, and you're not, if you're trained to be a musician, you don't become a bricklayer. That would be not melatao. You're not training for what your soul was made for to do. So I think if we really honor the proclivities of the soul, and then we feed that soul back, like in your dialogue theory, of like we dialogue back with that like really hardcore, that we can express the soul to a larger level. It'd be like a plant in the garden. Like, some plants are underexpressed and kind of wan because we don't feed and water them. But let's say we tended to the fertilizer of it and we fed it perfectly and watered it perfectly. That plant's going to be really robust. And that's what we have, the malleability to make a robust incarnation or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think it's part some of that is literal, like you were saying about training a musician or training a carpenter or different things like that. Sometimes those things are very straightforward and sometimes those things are uh more sometimes they're less clear in like concrete literal terms. They might be things that we have to give ourselves permission to do a lot of imagining about and a lot of it's like okay, or maybe a little bit of waiting or patience is part of what I'm like patience between patience for how that interweaves with my current life circumstances and things like that. Um, I think of Thomas More once did an interview about sort of how it's saying, when you think if you're inspired to be a certain kind of person or a certain vocation or something like that, great. Um, but think of it as don't take it too literally. Think everything is an image. Everything is like a psychic image first. So it might be that you realize that your destiny is to be an actor or a musician or whatever. And it might be that at this point in your life, you have a whole ton of caregiving responsibilities, and it's not that you can just sort of like drop everything and go train for that thing or whatever, but you can approach everything in your life that's happening right now with that perspective or with that attitude or with that knowledge. You might be making a meal, but you're still doing it as if you're the star performer of the show or something. Or there's always a way to let it meet your life circumstances if you have some flexibility around it and we don't need to like literalize or make like a prescription or a program out of everything. Even though you do that brilliantly, by the way, is like you come up with sort of strategies and plans that people can follow in this sense, which is part of why I really admire your work. But yeah, so there's this like interplay of those things,
Hmm.
and
I
yeah,
admire your work too, just so you know. I really
thank
think your work is really wonderful on astroerotics, and just that conversation we had last month was just so
you. Mm,
wise. And I really admire your work too. I just have to make a
mm.
shout out back to you.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun with that too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I was thinking
You want me
about
to read you a quote?
please, yeah,
No, go
please do.
ahead.
No, please read me the quote first, because then I'll feel
Okay,
more.
I'm just randomly picking from the book Ensoulment. Okay, tell me when
Yeah.
to stop.
Okay. Yeah.
Tell me when to stop.
Okay. Stop.
Okay. We might also want to notice that creatures can live as a stump with amputated limbs and such. In this example, we can see that the natural essence transcends the flesh. We can understand this property by observing a block of wood. When chopping off a piece from the entire block, the natural essence of the wood is not compromised. We can see that the nature of an organism is carried across entirely and throughout by the essence and its potentials.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah. This is
Wow.
actually a really good lesson on the soul because like
Yeah.
where is the soul?
Right. Right. Where is the soul? That's a great lesson. That because that's one of the arguments people use against there being a soul sometimes, is they say, where is it? I can't find it. It's as if that's the last word on everything.
Yeah.
In fact, I had a distant relative who last Thanksgiving was kind of coming at me because he's a neuroscientist and he was saying that like I'm sure you could find one of your friends who will sell their soul to do such and such. And he was saying, like, I know that because you know what? I have a friend who sold his soul. And you know how he sold his soul? By realizing that he didn't really have one, because none of us have one. He was kind of he was just straight up trolling me, I think, because like he knows I'm an astrologer and he's saying like
He was a soul troll.
yeah, he was a soul troll. Yeah. He's like, no, and I said, oh no, you fall into a nihilistic perspective. He said, no, no, trust me. The greatest freedom lies in knowing that you don't really have a soul, because when you know that, you can pretty much do whatever you want.
Oh my God.
That's but this is a
I was
neuroscientist,
like, do you want a neuroscientist, a
Yeah,
soulless neuroscientist? I don't
yeah,
really
yeah.
know.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
like soul scientists. We're like that nerdy, but on the soul. I would vote for us.
Yeah. Oh,
I would have us at a party.
I would trust us far more. But I
Yeah,
think it,
we care.
it leads to this other question of can you there's an idea that you can be anything you want to be. I think this is like probably popular in, things like existentialism too, right? That you can, it's your choice. Like the world is wide open. You can become anything you want to become, right? And I guess I resonate so much more to the idea of in one sense, I have Mars in Aquarius, like I'm very much about freedom and that's one of my values is like I always, as an astrologer, I always work with the eye toward what is going to be the most liberating or the most, yeah, what's going to be the most liberating perspective for this person that's going to kind of shake them out of their box or out of their trance of disempowerment or whatever that they're feeling. So I very much value freedom. And yet I sort of I also feel that it's not that we can just be whatever we want to be. We're actually each of us are meant to be something very specific. So what do you think about that?
Um, well, okay, so wait, ask the question.
Well, it's sort of like this idea of I'm just sort of riffing on this idea of you can be whatever you want to
Oh,
be.
okay, yeah, I do have something to say about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
in modern manifestation culture, which I think is great, they say whatever you imagine, you can achieve, right? And teleology is a little different, which would say what we imagine will depend on our soul senses machine and our sensory apparatus, right? Like if you're a Taurus, you might imagine baking. If you're a Scorpio, you might imagine being a horror artist or something like that. But that's we're having different imaginal realms because of the different sensory apparatus, right? So I think teleology would say that we all can be good at something, but not but each of us can't be good at everything, right? Like it's like I'm not built to be an Olympic athlete. I'm a water body, I'm kind of chubby and like all these things. And it's like some people would be like, well, if you imagine hard enough, you can be an Olympic hurdler too. And it's just like you can't get me to imagine exercising long enough to actually do that because I just don't have any interest in exercising. Kind of thing. I mean, I do swimming and stuff like that, but you get what I'm saying is like that we we do have a purpose, and that is what we should go about manifesting, not just some random element generator of like I want to be able to prove that I can do a thing, you know?
Yeah.
So I do think that the this is a good question, like getting limbs and stuff cut off. Okay, so what this
Mhm.
point of this paragraph that we just read is that the essence of a person is what drops down and concretizes as the seed is growing. And they make the case in this moment like it's the essence that is planted first, and then it grows into a thing. And so it's like if we cut off our leg or our arm, we still are our essence. We still have our chart and all these things. So it's interesting to say, what if somebody does have their limb cut off and it alters their physical form? How does that alter the chart? And it makes me think of those painters who don't have any arms, so they just paint with their mouth. It's like how does that change the trajectory of the person and do what does how does a person respond to limbs getting cut off as far as the soul goes?
Yeah, how does a person respond to getting limbs getting cut off as far as the soul goes? Yeah. Well, I think of how just being, yeah, being in an earthly incarnation immediately puts us into contact with entropy. So we're always, things are always falling apart. Um, and I was going back recently to Judith Hill wrote about Pisces. That's one of the main things that so she's talking about Pisces being at this constant war with entropy, which is something I like an insight that I love about Pisces. Like we don't typically think about that sign.
Mhm.
But anyway, but there's this you know, I sort of feel like from the soul's perspective, um, I like to imagine the soul as going on this gritty earth adventure, like with a lot of grit and courage, and being like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be in a human body. I know that my arms might fall off, or that I might lose a leg, you know, or that I might like get a disease, or you know, whatever, or get into an accident, or have this, that, or the other thing happen. But that's part of this adventure, and I'm still going to be here, you know. I'm still going to be here. I'm going to a place where safety is not really promised. And that's actually that's been an insight that's helpful for me as someone with so much earth in my chart is like you as you probably are already adept at this as a Scorpio, but like it's just knowing that you know what, instead of saying it's okay, you're always safe and protected, I almost find it more comforting to just be like you're on the earth. You chose to come to earth and you knew like you knew this is an adventure. Your soul knows that this is an adventure, so safety is never guaranteed here. Like it's just not part of the ride, but your soul will still be around, you know, no matter what happens. So in a
Mhm.
way that it's kind of like safety. Anyway, so I do think that the soul there is something that endures no matter what entropy is faced. Um, and so, but then in terms of being in the body and and actualizing and manifesting those inclinations, um, I want to weave something real quick, and I know we're coming to the end of like almost to the end of our time, but there is something about if something is really deep in a person's heart, if there's a really deep longing or inclination towards something or inspiration, I do think that that is reflected in the soul. That is reflected in the soul's blueprint, meaning the astrological chart. I think it's in Orderly who says if it's in your heart, it's in your chart. And I do think that in my experience, that's true. I've never really seen that not to be the case.
Mhm.
Uh, I think it's more so that sometimes we have to do some work disentangling our hearts. Don't you talk about this too, Andrea? The heart's yearnings, or there's a
Oh
writer
yeah,
who
the
talks
heartfelt longings. That was a big thing
about
in
longings. Yeah,
teleology.
yeah.
Yeah.
Heartfelt longings. But sometimes we have to disentangle those from wants that we are kind of taught that we should have, things that we're sort of have become habituated to want or to chase or to pursue. I think sometimes people can acquire those or be conditioned to pursue certain things that are not indicated in their chart. And so that's part of our work as astrologers is to bring them back to, you know, okay, well, this is your core essence, which probably, and sure, maybe this is my belief system that I'm saying that I'm naming here, but speaks to one of your heartfelt or multiple of your heartfelt longings that you genuinely have. And I think that part of the work too is bringing them to, okay, how can you make that real, given that you've lost an arm, or given that you are, you know, chronically ill, or you know, this or that. Like there has to be a way, there has to be a path. And I do think that's part of our art and the truly healing and transformative work we can do. So, what do you
Yeah,
think?
well, that's a really good answer. Okay. Well, it makes me think of the hearts, like the sun and moon, sun is at home in Leo and moon's at home in Cancer. It's like the fire heart and the water heart. Those are like here. And it sounds like the heartfelt longings come in here. So the chart kind of hits your heart. And if we have our hearts beating, then maybe the essence kind of lives in that, heart place. And that limbs or no limbs are if we have a heartfelt longing for something, we will figure out something that we can do, you know, that can satisfy that heartfelt longing. We might need a modified version. Like if we're want to play music and we can't play the piano with our hand, we might get really good with the left hand, or we might, if our heart wants to be really technical and magical, maybe we do something really cool with our left hand. But if we really want to play this one certain song, like maybe that's the longing, then we will figure it out with our left hand. So I think you're
Yeah.
right that it really comes down to those the what we desire to do is part of the soul first. And the chart is kind of a map of desires of desires to become. I want to become good at this song, or I want to become someone who can paint this one thing, or kind of thing. So I think I like what you're saying there about that's probably first. I also makes me think of my mom told me something it's like called pre-morbid perception. Like I don't know what that is like before you get your arm cut off, if you have a good attitude about life and don't have a victimy temperament, then you won't have a victimy temperament about your arm getting cut off. You'll be like, oh, my arm, I lost an arm. And I feel like that can be in the chart too. Like let's say you're a super Scorpio, and Scorpios have grit, like they're just like and so they get their arm cut off and they're like, I still ride my motorcycle, I just use my leg, or like but that can be part of the soul too, is to have this persistence or perseverant badassery, whereas
Mm.
another chart could be kind of easily blocked, maybe it's a Sun Saturn conjunction in Cancer, and they're like, oh, excuse me, sorry for living, and so then they get their arm cut off, and they're like, oh my God, I'm so terribly victimized, and that is the longing, is to be taken care of and pampered, so I mean, I don't know, not, I hope I didn't offend anyone with these but I'm just saying that the pre-morbid temperament has a lot to do with the soul and what the soul would respond to that loss of limb.
That's
But
a
I love
great point. Yeah.
I
Go
love to
ahead.
bring up entropy. I think that was super smart.
What's that? No, I love those examples you just gave because I feel like, I know I've been someone who needs more of that other perspective you just gave of like the Scorpio being like, yeah, but I still ride my motorcycle, and I've actually been trying to channel that recently of just being like, flipping the middle finger to like the universe or the medical establishment or whatever needs to be done. It's like, or it's like if I do some spell work, or something and say like, oh no, but what if I, wake up tomorrow and I'm in the underworld or something, that I imagine some like super hardcore Scorpio, being like, just like rolling my eyes and be like, like I'm here, like here I am again, really? Okay, all right, fine. I'll get
I feel
myself.
like what you would
You
do as a
know?
Taurus is like dress up your stump, and you would be all like full of
Yeah.
flowers and
Yes. Yes. Make it beautiful. Just beautify everything.
and
Yeah.
you'd be like the eroticness of the stump.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Thus
Find
proving
right.
that the essence, like the spirit kicks body's ass in this case.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's true. It's true.
I have to tell you, this book, Ensoulment, you don't have it, it sounds like.
No, I don't, but I want to. It's on
This
my
is
list.
my favorite book I've ever read in my life. It took 7 years to translate, but like literally this book is just, it's an essay. It doesn't offer an answer. It's not like the soul gets in the body XYZ. It's always questions like, does the soul need to be led to the body, or does it incarnate itself? And I think, astrologers to me are technical philosophers. It's really hard to argue that. You can say, are we scientists? Maybe this or that, but we are definitely technical philosophers. And I think if you want to, work your philosophy muscles, this book is really good. An
Mm.
example of this is one time and I know we have to go in a second, but one time I had a client ask me about abortion. She got an amniocentesis, and they found out the baby had Down syndrome, and she wanted to know what the chart said about should she abort. And I actually used the theories in this book to help her make a decision, because it's about ensoulment, like about how does the soul enter the body and what that looks like and what the ancients would say. And they're always comparing people to plants, and like, so I think this can help with your muscles around death and rebirth and coming in and out of the body and things like that. So,
Oh, beautiful. Wow.
but
Great.
I want to make sure people know how to find you. I was not trying to plug this book. I just really talk about it, and I just think it's like one of astrology's best kept secrets.
I think it's important. Yeah, I'm so glad you did. Um,
Right. How can
yeah,
people find you?
yeah. They can find me on Facebook. I know that's the main place we connect. I'm there at Nate Spear, just my name. On Instagram at weird.astro.body. And I'm also, they can find my Substack column, also Weird Ast Substack, Weird Astro Body, or on my website, weirdastrobody.com. That's pretty much it. Oh, and my podcast, which will rebirth soon, is speaking of death and rebirth, the soul of it is still around. It's called Planets in Culture. So you can find yeah, you can find that on Spotify or wherever you find podcasts. And I'd love to have you as a guest on that podcast soon too. So,
I would
all right.
love to come talk to you. I love talking to you.
Yeah,
Um,
likewise. Yeah,
one of the things about working together twice is I really got to we see our cadence, and we just are really you bring such good questions to the table and have such good things to say. So I really appreciate you, Nate.
I really appreciate you.
And it's ironic that you're such a bodies person and you asked about the soul today. So that was
True.
ironic.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Body
All right,
themselves.
well, hit
Yeah.
me up soon. I'd love to be on your podcast.
Okay.
All right,
Yes. All right. Have a
have
good
a good
one.
day.